Hey guys, just going to do a quick video on conscientious objectors, or conchies. When you get this kind of question in the exam, the chances are that you'll get some kind of comparison question. So it could be differences between World War I and World War II, or it could be differences between the way the government treated conchies and the way that people in society and people's attitudes were towards conchies at the time. Factors are pretty straightforward. Key thing here is going to be you focus on change on comparison. So when you revise conchies, you need to revise World War I and World War II together, just so that you can see some of the differences. And obviously it's going to be about the government's attitude, how the government approached people who refused to fight in the war, and what people's attitudes were, the people in society. So in case you don't know it, conscientious objectors or conchies are people who refuse to take part in wars or conflicts. And this can be for a whole variety of reasons. It could be for religious reasons, it could be for personal reasons, it could be for political reasons. For example, people on the left wing and communists might refuse to get involved in a capitalist war. I'm going to start with World War I, then I'm going to talk about World War II. I'm going to give you two pieces of legislation, two acts that you can get in there. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about what a pacifist, an absolutist and an alternativist is. So first of all, we'll look at World War I. In case you didn't know, World War I was 1914 to 1918. And in 1916, the British government introduced conscription for all men aged 18 to 41. Now initially they introduced it for single men, but then very quickly introduced it for people who are married as well. Now what conscription means is that you have to sign up and fight. And this was known as the Military Service Act in 1916. So this said that if you're a man, you have to sign up and you have to fight. It's mainly because the war was dragging on. They thought it'd be over by Christmas, but by 1916 they realised it wasn't. Now, about 2.5 million men signed up to join the war. However, about 16,000 people refused. And the majority of these were on religious grounds. I think Quakers actually made up the largest majority of people who refused to join. And they cited the Bible as their reason for not joining. They said, "Thou shalt not kill." All right? The Bible says you shouldn't kill people, murder is a sin, and they said, I'm not signing up to fight people and kill them. Okay. Now, for the majority of people in England, they supported the war. When I say the majority, we're probably talking about 95%. So COs, conchies, conscientious objectors, were not treated very nicely at all. Common things that were used to ridicule them were the white feathers, which were stuffed in the noses and ears of people on the streets. They would be harassed and attacked by gangs, usually of girls, because they would have husbands or boyfriends that had gone off to fight the war. So if you were a man and you were walking around in late 1916, and people would ask you, why have you not signed up? Why are you not involved in the war? They were accused of being cowards, and they were attacked on the streets and ridiculed. People's attitudes were really quite severe because of all the propaganda that was used by the government to suck people in and make them feel like they should support the war and they should fight. So the 16,000 conchies had to appear before a local tribunal. Now, the local tribunal in World War I was made up of mainly retired soldiers and people who were ex-military. So you can imagine that they were going to be extremely harsh on these people who were refusing to fight. Of the 16,000 conchies, about 6,000 of them refused to accept the verdict of the tribunal, and they were put into prison. And when we say they were put into prison, we mean they were put into horrific conditions, solitary confinement, treated very, very, very harshly. And by the end of World War I, about 73 of them had died in prison. After World War I, conchies were stripped of their right to vote until 1926. So the treatment of them by the government was really harsh, and the treatment of them by society was very, very harsh. World War II, we see a slight difference. There's a slight difference in treatment, 1939 to 1945, in case you didn't know. In 1939, the government enacts or brings in conscription. This time it's under the National Service Act of 1939. And around 59,000 conchies register. This time, the government is a bit more lenient. The tribunals are held, but this time they are no longer staffed by former soldiers and ex-military people. They're civilians that are deciding whether the person has a legitimate reason for refusing to sign up. And this time, the government makes a greater effort to give these people an alternative way of supporting the war effort. So it isn't just a case of locking them up in jail. They offered them things like farming, working in the munitions factories, creating weapons, logistics, driving trucks, even anything you can think of to support the war effort. What would traditionally have been the work of women in the war effort, but it doesn't matter. The government decide that they can use these people. However, although the government's taken a more lenient stance on conscientious objectors, people aren't. The attitudes of people are not. People's attitudes hadn't changed much. They still looked at the conscientious objectors in World War II as being cowards. So they were attacked on the street, they were ridiculed, they were embarrassed. Newspapers printed cartoons and articles ridiculing them, calling them cowards, and actually many of them were sacked from their jobs. Now, I said I'd come back to these key terms. A pacifist is someone who refuses to be involved in any kind of violent activity, and it's something that's usually associated with religion, Quakers in particular, pacifists. So their reason for not signing up and not fighting would be to cite that they're a pacifist. An absolutist is someone who takes that pacifism to the highest degree. So they would refuse to work in a munitions factory making bombs, because they would still, in their eyes, see their actions as leading to someone dying or to murder. So these would be the people who would absolutely refuse to support the war effort. An alternativist would be someone who would be willing to do that. So someone who would be quite happy to work in a capacity to support the war effort. Now, when you do revise conscientious objectors, make sure that you are really, really clear about the way that they were treated in both world wars and the differences. Because I think that if a question comes up, it'll be very much on the lines of, how were conscientious objectors treated in the First and Second World War, or explain the difference in treatment. And really, what you've got here is people's attitudes aren't really changing a lot, okay? Whereas government attitudes have changed a little bit more. Right, hopefully that's giving you enough for conscientious objectors.